Thanks very much for coming. Welcome to this session. My name is Peter Chargin. I'm Vice President of Product Marketing at Delphix. I've been helping federal, state, and local governments through my role in product marketing for the past 25 years or so. Let's not count exactly how many. I'm responsible for product marketing worldwide for Delphix. Vivek, my colleague, is responsible for the success of all our customers in this area, including the state of California, all the agencies here. I've also helped organizations on the commercial side around the world over the last long time try to adopt new technology. And candidly, I've never been as excited as I am about Delphix because of the way that it is able to solve specific problems now that you're probably facing, and then grow and grow and grow to support more and more use cases, more problems, and help you in more and more ways. So that's my introduction. Quick set of hands. How many people here would consider themselves very technical? How many people consider it kind of medium technology and less technical? Okay. And what kind of agencies do you represent, or what departments? Franchise Tax Board, or CalPERS, or Health and Human Services, or Department of Technology? Okay. Anyone else?
Industrial Relations.
Industrial Relations? I'm sorry?
Social services.
Social services, super. Okay, so that gives me a kind of an overview of where we are. So let's just jump right in. I wonder if the problems that we solve are the problems that you're facing, and I bet the answer is yes. There are probably issues that you have that are listed here, and I wonder if these are the things that you're facing. How many people here are trying to figure out how to get releases faster through their development cycles? Yes, these are supposed to be simple questions. How many people here are trying to figure out how to handle data privacy concerns? Yes. How many people are trying to figure out how to do data migrations, or application archiving, or application retirement? Okay. And how many people here are facing cost pressures, right? So these are the sorts of things that customers around the world in government and in commercial businesses are trying to solve. Now, we don't do everything. Delphix is a startup company, about 450 people, based in Menlo Park, California. We've been around doing business for the past 8 years or so, and we're helping a ton of companies on the data side address these problems through the data side. And they've come to us looking for solutions, and it turns out that these are not only their requirements, but these are the results that they achieve. So if there's one thing that you could try to remember is, what would it mean to you if you could get double the application release process, application release cycle, get features through your process twice as fast at half the cost? What would that mean to you? What would it mean if you were able to, instead of waiting 3 weeks to get a new application development environment or a new test environment up and running, what would it mean if you could get it in 15 minutes? What would it mean if you were able to cut your cost of an application retirement and an application migration in half? Double the speed at half the cost simultaneously. It's something that our customers are doing pretty much around the world, not only in government agencies, for example, Cal State Lottery, General Services here in California, the state university system, but the #1 retailer, Walmart, the #1 food service, McDonald's, the #1 financial service, Fidelity, the #1 auto manufacturer in the world, Toyota. Twice the application release cycles with half the cost. That's the sort of thing that we're able to provide. Now, we do it by trying to help you with that sort of, that part of your architecture that's in the build part not the application running, right? So you have essentially application development, application operation. All the application development that you do, all the application testing, all the application data archiving, disaster recovery, analytics and reporting, we address those environments and the problems that you find in those areas. We're not so much on the network side. We're not a network provider. We're not a database management system. We're not an application development tool. We are a platform that will help you manage and optimize your non-production data, and that's the secret to our success. So think back 10 years ago, 15 years ago. Okay, so put yourself 15 years ago, and you hear about this company, it's called VMware, and you think, boy, they don't really know how to capitalize very well at all. They have two letters, V and M. What does it mean? What is VMware? And then you learn about why it's so important to virtualize a server and the sort of benefits that you can get when you're able to have multiple virtual machines running on a single piece of actual hardware. And at the time you thought, oh, well, that might be helpful. And then how many people here are using VMware for essentially all their applications, all their environments? Everybody does, right? The vast majority is virtualized. We're going to go through exactly the same thing with your application data. Exactly the same thing. So let's talk now about what happens in applications as you're trying to go through the application lifecycle. Data is the new bottleneck. It used to be hardware servers, it used to be hardware networks, it used to be storage. Now the problem is data. So if you look at this diagram, I'm not sure if you can read it, but what happens if you're an application developer and you're trying to create a new environment? Well, the first thing that you need to do is you'll make a request out to the team, your DBA team. Say, please give me environment, and then you'll wait. You'll wait and wait and wait. And so you'll be much less productive than you would have been alternatively. So that ticket will go to someone who's on the help desk, and that person is probably not a DBA, and so he'll look up in the set of processes and try to figure out, okay, well, what do I do with this? And he'll forward it on to the DBA team. The DBA team will look at the storage team and say, do I have enough storage somewhere that I can create a 5 petabyte database, if that's the size of the environment that you're trying to create? Maybe that DBA has to, or the storage administrator has to request new hardware or send it back. It's got to get escalated. You go through a long series of manual steps to actually just get the hardware storage allocated. And then you have to get back to the DBA, and the DBA says, okay, well, let me allocate the database. Of course, I have to check and see if there are any licenses that I have available. I allocate the database. Then I take the data that's from the production environment and I move it over. All the bits go over through some typically brittle process to get it into the database. Okay? And then I send back to the developer and I say, okay, well, it's ready. So that's been a process. It's got multiple people in it, a lot of steps, a lot of manual steps, and those processes are typically prone to failure and prone to delay. So it's a problem for 3 main reasons. There are a bunch of inefficient processes. There's a whole bunch of teams involved, and you actually have the physical laws of physics, where it just takes a long time to move data. So we fix all that problem. That problem of creating new environments, we totally change that from a 3-week process down to a 15-minute process. And the way we do it is as follows. First of all, you take an environment and you have a one-time ingestion or a one-time copy of the data into what we call the Delphix Engine. Okay, so we compress the data because much of it is the same. So we do dedupe the data through a bunch of patented algorithms. We'll dedupe the data and we'll compress it by a factor of about 3. So if you have a 10 terabyte database, typically it gets down to about a 3 terabyte database size. Okay, that is now in the Delphix engine. We've connected back to the source so that we keep track of changes. So anytime there's a change to your production database, we'll keep track of that. Okay? That is now within the Delphix system, and it can be provided or can be provisioned off instantly at any time. How does that happen? Well, instead of trying to actually copy the bits over, we'll make an image of that available off to the developer or to the QA person or to the person who's doing the production reporting, whoever it might be. So instead of copying the data, we just make that data visible back to the original version. Okay, so we essentially set up a pointer from the database on the target system back to the Delphix engine. So regardless of how many copies you need to make, and what we found is that our customers have about 9 copies of their production system. So for every terabyte of data in production, they'll have 9 terabytes in their non-production systems, different dev test systems, et cetera. So instead of making those copies available, we'll just point back to the Delphix engine. So essentially, what you have is you're able to set up a copy of the system or a new environment instantly for free. That change of changing from moving bits over to a new environment, to an instant free system, frees up your developers in a way that's very similar to what happened when you went from an 8-week process of getting a new server, physical server, to an instant process of getting a virtual server. So it frees up your developers, it frees up your QA organization.
What is that? How does that impact your license with these folks in column A?
How does it impact your license? So the question is, how does it impact your license with the folks in column A? For example, your database license? Well, what we found is that you don't have any additional usage of databases because your developers, your QA people, what have you, will spin up an environment, they'll do whatever test needs to be done, and then they'll rip the environment down, and they'll go back to coding. And so it frees up the development, the licenses end up being in pool. So what we've typically found is that there's no additional usage of licenses.
I can answer it slightly differently. So we are mounting the quote-unquote virtual database, which is a Delphix patented object, onto the same target server where today your physical databases are running. So there's no additional database servers that you have to create or additional licensing implications or that regarding that. Yeah? There's a lot more. Wait, there's more.
Oh wait, yeah. There's more. So the next thing that you may notice, is kind of hard to see here. Right here, there's a little slider. Remember I said that we connect back to the database, the source database, and we keep track of changes as they come through. Well, what would happen if you had the ability as a developer to click back to any point in time, any second, any transaction, so that you could run a test and then refresh instantly? You could run another test and refresh it instantly, run another test. Instead of waiting for a whole database refresh, you can just rewind it. And it takes a minute, 2 minutes, rather than a day, which is typical for most production organizations. Sometimes they can get it down to an hour, but instead of sending a ticket back to the DBA team, waiting for someone to pick up the ticket, actually do the work, the database does the refresh, each step only takes a little bit of time, perhaps. Maybe the database refresh takes an hour, but all the waiting steps in between add up to a long process, typically 24 hours. Delphix provides a self-service mechanism for you to do the initial provisioning, but then also to do the initial rewind. Or, I'm sorry, not the initial rewind, but the rewind at any point in time during your testing process. So you can test, oh, broke a little bit. Let me try a slightly different test. Roll back, forward and back all the time. No problem. Instantly for free. Okay? You might also notice a few of the things over here: refresh, branch, bookmark, rewind, and integrate. So branching, if you're in the QA organization, how many times have your QA people who report to you say, you know, I reported this bug, but the developer sent it back, said he couldn't replicate it? Well, typically the problem is that the data that's causing that specific problem to occur can't be found or can't be replicated. With Delphix, you can set a bookmark so that it's you, and the QA person says, okay, here's where the bug is. I'm going to set a bookmark. And then you can send that bookmark essentially to the development team and say, here's the situation, run these steps with this data, and you will find the problem. We found that to be incredibly effective for the QA teams to improve the development process, reducing the number of bugs that actually make it into production. All right? Now, those bookmarks can be shared. Furthermore, you can branch. So I might make a, you know, we said we make these copies of the database. I can make a copy of a copy and a copy of a copy, so that if I'm responsible for an entire organization that's a set of developers, I can set up my own branch of production data. Maybe I make a few changes to the schema. Maybe I set in some boundary condition data, synthetic data, and I have a branch of the data that's my own. I can then share that as well among my QA team, among other development organizations. Again, it's instant and it's free. And so you have this tremendous power available to you through the Delphix platform that allows you just to run wild in terms of creating data. Questions?
Who will create the data? So the first copy, so the DBA will put a copy of data, then give the tester, or the user tester they can go through, make a copy anytime?
Okay, so the way that the question is, who makes the first copy of data? Okay, so again, with this diagram, it's kind of hard to see, but the DBA typically, or you'll have a Delphix engineer, someone who is typically in a DBA kind of a role, will ingest the data, we call it ingest, or importing the data into the Delphix engine. That's under the control typically of IT operations, typically a DBA. And then that person, that team, sets up the roles, responsibilities, the access controls, and says, well, what's the retention policy for that data? Who can actually create copies? How long can those copies be available, et cetera, et cetera. So you, if you're the IT operations team, you get control over all those things, who can make copies, et cetera, so that you still control the provisioning of databases, because you don't want to have 500,000 copies set up and running of your Oracle license or your SQL Server license or whomever it might be, because you'd be out of compliance, right? So you can control that, but you don't have to be responsible for provisioning the databases anymore. That gets turned over to the QA organization themselves, the testers themselves, the developers themselves. Okay? There's a question over here.
Because if you copy data from production database to the backup very often, so we have to slow down the server.
So is that slowing down the server? So the question was, if you're copying data from production onto the Delphix engine, does it slow down the server? The answer is no, it doesn't. We're not adding any extra processing to the server itself. We'll grab the change logs that are automatically created. We'll grab those and utilize those. Okay?
So if I could add to that answer, you're not hitting the production server or backup server when you need a copy. You just come to the Delphix engine. Delphix engine has all the data it needs to produce a 100% faithful copy of whatever state is inside production. And depending on that retention policy you've set, you can actually say, hey, I had a Sev1 defect last night, midnight. Give me the data from 12 p.m., or 12 a.m. rather, and we'll give you that data right out of Delphix engine. Production server doesn't know what's going on. This is all happening with the Delphix server. Okay?
All the data from the Delphix engine, and they want to update this copy of the data. So how do you mentioned about the log shaking, right? So that means you constantly get the log from production and put into the engine, the new copy of this data, right? So it's continuous basis, or you can set up a computer.
You can set it up and configure it how you want it. Now, there's one other thing that's important. I don't want to run out of time. I want to call your attention to this part, which is the mask. It's kind of hard to see right here, the mask. So I said individually, yeah, it looks like a little mask, doesn't it? How many people have data privacy concerns? Well, everybody has data privacy concerns. How many times you see information, oh, this breach happened and so-and-so lost hundreds of thousands of records and cost us many millions of dollars. Well, it continues to get worse. And it's not going to get any better. We have a whole subsection of our economy now, unfortunately, that is making lots and lots of money trying to break our security. I don't think there's any other place in computer science where we have two industry factions warring. You got the black hats, you got the white hats. So it's not going to get any better. So what you need to do is you need to mask the data. Now, typically in production, it's set up pretty well, right? You have good firewalls, you've got physical security, people have to swipe their card before they get into the cage. Oh, there is a cage. Well, there isn't a cage for your developers. Sometimes you may want to put your developers in a cage. That's your own business. There's not a cage there. People put QA data on their laptops so they take it home. It gets lost. So what would happen if you were able to take the data out of the production environment, or I'm sorry, take the data out of the production database, mask it, and then from there transfer it into a Delphix server, that masked data, so that anything you provisioned is guaranteed to be safe. It's masked, and we have very advanced masking. We can go into it if you have questions on it. It's not just changing the data from Peter Chargin to semicolon 5, 6, 12, exclamation point bracket. It goes from Peter Chargin to John Adams or Peter Chargin to Fred Smith. And wherever Peter Chargin is, it's going to be consistent. So that if you have multiple databases within one system, the referential integrity is maintained. So it ends up being great. That's very important when you're doing application archiving or application migration. You're trying to move multiple systems to the cloud. Very important. We can talk about that in more detail. Okay?
So,
quick question.
That was one thing that I really wanted to touch on, was the referential integrity of the data. That's number one. Number two is it possible to have two different people having different views of the data? One mask, one unmasked.
So the question was, what about referential integrity of the data? Two things I'd like to say. First is, when you're talking just about Delphix presents itself, okay, this is a little technical, it presents itself up as storage. The database system thinks that it's talking to a disk. As a matter of fact, it can't know that it's talking to Delphix. It just doesn't know. And so we make sure that the database system maintains referential integrity just like a disk system does. We take care of all the data at the block level, essentially, okay? Within a masking system, we definitely take care of the referential integrity within the database and across all the different databases that are set up together. Now, if you have some people who should have access to the clear text data and other people who should not have access to that, you can set it up certainly so that that's the case. You would want to make sure that you maintain very tight access controls to anything that's not masked. Okay? Okay, so question, yeah.
So if I understand correctly, your product is set up against the production database and it's like a middleware product, and then the developers can play around with the production data essentially, but it's not really any production, it's down off the Delphi, a copy of it.
Typically, the way it's used is that your production database is running, you import that into the Delphix engine, and then your developers, your QA people, the reporting organization, disaster recovery, all those different things will get a copy of the production data, essentially, yes.
So I guess my question is there a risk, a security risk of having an open pipeline from production down to
So is there a risk between having the production, from the production environment over to the non-production area? There is no more of a risk than you would have typically, right? So you have to make sure that either you mask that data before it leaves your production environment, and then it's safe, or you have, if you can't have it masked for some reason, then you have to have really strict controls around that. So
there's an architecture that we don't show in this slide for obvious reasons. You could have a production, in your production zone, right? Let's say we're calling it the red zone because it has sensitive data. And then you have a non-prod, that's a green zone where you can only have mass data. So in the red zone, you would install Delphix. You would ingest from your production or production standby. You know, we don't have to be tied to production. Any clone of production would do. And you mask it there. You apply all your mask rules. Once you've validated that the data is adequately masked, then Delphix does the replication of data from this red zone over to the Delphix engine in the green zone. And then you can just give it to anybody who wants, because that data is now pretty much desensitized to your satisfaction. So we would address that risk in that way, and pretty much all the large enterprises that we work with, whether it's retail or finance or high tech, that's the paradigm they follow.
that's also the paradigm, skipping ahead, that's the paradigm that the state of California University, the state university system of California follows. So they've recently gone through a process where they're trying to consolidate all their financials and HR systems down to a single HR system. It's PeopleSoft. It's a 21 terabyte database. And it's in one data center, but the development of the differences, the development of customizations for each of the individual universities is the responsibility of each university. And so the central team has to make available copies of that database. So they came to us and they said, how am I going to make copies of a 21 terabyte database available to all my developers? And we said, well, that's going to be hard if you really make copies. And by the way, don't do it until you mask the data. And so it turns out that the way PeopleSoft is set up, there's about 13 million columns, no kidding, 13 million columns in a PeopleSoft database because of the way the table structure is. And so we masked those columns, all those columns through the 80,000 tables, and then we made available to them this virtual data. They are now in the process of rolling out 1,200 to 2,000 copies of that production database to all the individual developers at each of the individual universities. And they did the masking in about 6 weeks, 3 weeks for the HR system, 3 weeks for the financials. And their developers now have access to this safe data instantly for free. Okay. So that's one example you might find interesting. So now there are a couple things that I'd like to cover here. Getting a little bit short of time. More questions?
Yeah, when you copy the data from production to test in like the Delphix Engine server, do you need like if Oracle database, do you need the Oracle software installed, or no? This one you do not need anything. Maybe even a SQL server you do not need anything. So
the question is, how do you actually move data from the production the production system into the Delphix engine? Do you need any software from any of the vendors? The answer is no. You don't need any additional licenses or any special features or.
You don't need to install like Oracle on this engine.
You don't need to install Oracle on the Delphix engine. So we'll use standard. In Oracle's case, it's RMAN protocol. Essentially, we support Oracle, we support SQL Server, we support DB2, we support MySQL, we support Postgres. I'm sure I'm missing a couple. So essentially, whatever database you're trying to get to. Okay.
This can be a virtual server for this engine?
And it can be, yes, it's typically running on a virtual server. Now, our server wants to be a pretty fast server because we're handling super big amounts of data, and you want to have lots of memory for it, and you want it to be attached to a fast network. But other than that, nothing special. Okay? Now, this slide talks about the multiple copies of databases that you'll have. and you'll have typically responsibility for not just one application, but multiple applications. So I think of it as lots and lots of, okay, so I've got an application for my finance, and probably 3 or 4 databases for that, or 10, or whatever, and then I have, more and more applications, and each of those, so you might have, in a large organization, I was at Avaya last week, they have about 2,000 applications. They each have between 1 and 20 databases associated with it. That's a lot. Then you copy that 10 times. And instead of just having, copies of all of those, you get multiplied out so many times. You can imagine 21 terabytes multiplied 1,000 times or 2,000 times. You condense that all into just one Delphix engine. And you save a ton of money through storage. So remember I said early on, people bring this on and they use it for one use case and then they start using it as a platform. Well, they bring it on and they're able to justify the cost and the change actually because of the huge savings in storage cost. You can justify it by just straight savings costs. So for example, Molina, I'll talk about in a second, they're saving $10 million just on storage. Same thing with HPE, same thing with HPE, the new split off from HP, the HPI, the other side as well. People save a ton of money from storage. The primary strategic benefit is the time, because you can always, if you can create a business case, then you can spend the money. But you can't create time. And your competitors, if you're in a commercial environment, or your citizens, if you're in a government environment, are going to be demanding things of you, and you can't just create that.
Do you have this running in the Cal Cloud?
Do we have this running in the Cal Cloud? Not yet. We have the department looking at it. Okay, so maybe the 3 of us should get together and talk. There's no reason for it not to. But let's talk about that afterwards. Okay. So one more thing, I thought that there would be some people here who would be interested in data or application archival. And just a couple of use cases. There's a company called Coherent. You may have heard of them. They're the laser people. They were moving from an application of Oracle, the e-business suite, from version 11 to version 12. They brought it in to help with this process of testing. There's a huge, when you're moving from one environment to another, there's a huge amount of testing that you have to do of all your customizations, et cetera. And they realized after just a little bit of time that they would be able to keep the data and the application, by the way, available essentially as long, for 7 years, and they'd be able to instantly provision that data. Again, it's compressed, so you save a ton of storage space, but you'd be able to very quickly provision that data. And so, for example, they moved from an SLA of about a week with their auditors to an SLA of about an hour with their auditors. So if you needed to go back and say, well, what was the data on March, at the end of quarter close, the end of March in 2015, then they were able to get that data in an hour rather than in a whole day or a whole week, or who knows how long it'll be if you can't find the tape. So in addition to doing this data virtualization, applications are just data, right? You have an EBS application or an SAP application. It's just data. And so not only do we do this data virtualization for databases, we'll actually do the data virtualization on an application. So you can, at the press of a button, spin up an entire Oracle EBS suite. And so we have a couple customers who do that. Instead of taking 6 weeks, it now takes an hour to spin up an entire new environment for Oracle. And so if you're doing any kind of application archival, this is a great product for doing that. The Marines did essentially the same thing. They ended up having a 30% improvement in their data conversion and in their application conversion. Costco did the same thing with SAP. Okay. So, almost out of time here. Is that right? Yep. So we have lots and lots of customer successes that we'd be happy to talk to you about, both inside the government and outside the government. Bunch of stuff if you're trying to do DevOps and trying to move through faster, if you do agile development, or even if you're trying to move from monthly releases down to daily releases, or daily releases down to hourly releases. We have bunches of customers who do that. And then they find that they're able to do things like, oh, well, we're not going to use this for faster application development. We're going to use it for production break fix support. We're going to use it for disaster recovery. Comcast is a customer. Don't tell anybody I told you this story. So we have a customer, and they had someone who dropped a table out of production. That table was their titles table in the video on demand system. That caused the application to crash. That made the senior executives unhappy because their revenue producing application was failing. And so they had to, first of all, figure out what the problem was. So you know what the developers did? They went click, 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 click. Oh, holy cow, this table's been dropped. So instead of trying to go back, figure out where's my backup, who knows how long it's been out of date, they just spun it up under Delphix. Delphix made it available instantly. And so instead of being down for a day or a couple of days, it was down for less than 30 minutes. They were able to run the system essentially by just pointing the application to the Delphix Engine. So you can use this in production break fix. You can use this disaster recovery, application archiving, all sorts of things. Quick question.
So if the production drop the table, do the copy on the Delphix also drop the table?
So the question was, if production drops the table, will Delphix also drop the table? The answer is yes. It will drop the table. However, because you can go back this time flow, you can rewind and get to the exact spot. So the answer is yes, we do drop the table, but no, we also kind of have it also because of the time flow. So you get the best of both worlds. And that's the problem with your disaster recovery or mirroring systems. You drop a table, oops, your mirroring systems dropped it. Or we have another company, not to be named, and someone ran a conversion process and converted dollars to euros. Well, that one hurt. Somebody must have felt been similar problem. You've heard that story? Yeah. So things didn't balance. You didn't know about it until month-end close. So click, 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 click. Oh, somebody ran this job. What's such a, oh my. So they were able, again, to kind of recover, figure out what the problem was and fix it.
Let's open it for questions. I'm sure we'll be around here. We have a booth downstairs. I know there's a social event, drinks or something later this afternoon, later this evening. Please, by all means, feel free to swing by our booth. Find any one of us. I think I've given some of you my cards. If I missed somebody, I apologize. I'll hit you up right after this. We are here in state of California, like Peter mentioned. We work with Department of General Services. They were one of our early customers. You want to talk to somebody, talk to Gary Renslow there. He is the CTO. There's a whole bunch of people in their architecture and DBA team. Here in Sacramento, greater Sacramento area, Sutter Health is my customer, Delta Dental is my customer, Blue Sheila, California is my customer. Hopefully many, many more. And if you come by to the Bay Area office, you're always welcome to visit us in Menlo Park. We hold executive briefings there for all companies around the world. They fly in, they drive up. Our CIOs there, our CTOs there, our founders there, CEO, CFO, all engineering executives, Peter included, are all there. We learn from you. We're not perfect. We are where we are today because our customers have given us ideas on how to make our product better. Some of the things I told you about, masking, that was an acquisition that Delphix did last year of a company that was in the challenges quadrant for Gartner. The data archival piece, this is a use case that Coherent, one of our customers, brought to our notice, and we productized it. Well, guess what? Gartner puts it in the leaders quadrant for that specific category. The replication piece that we talked about is something that we did recently. We essentially invented a Delphix replication protocol that compresses that data even more and encrypts it over the wire to the other side. The use case that you talked about, the production risk, we invented something, we can't say we invented, but we created something something called selective data distribution, so that only masked data is replicated from engine A to engine B, thereby eliminating the risk of engine B ever having unmasked data. I could go on forever. There's a reason we are in business, and that's because of our customers. Hopefully some of you will give us the opportunity to earn your trust in your business. We really appreciate you coming over here today.
Super. Thanks very much.